Thomas Jefferson wrote that in a letter to John Adams. As a matter of fact, his collection spanned every conceivable genre you can think of. He had science, philosophy, art, languages, religions, you name it. When the British burned Washington, D.C. practically to the ground in the Battle of 1812, Jefferson actually wrote to Congress and offered to not quite donate, but sell a portion of his own personal library to Congress. And in 1815, they took him up on that, spending just under $24,000 at the time. And they got about 6,400 volumes, which oddly enough were sold based upon their measurements and their weight, not so much what they had to offer in terms of their intrinsic literal value.
And now for something completely different.
In the mid-15th century, a German named Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press. And as a result, buildings like the one behind me became a vital part of our intellectual advancement. But although it's easy for us to take the printing press for granted, we cannot possibly overestimate not only its impact and influence on the European Renaissance, but on civilization as a whole. Gutenberg's printing press did far more than just allow him to print the Bible or multiple copies of just about anything with great efficiency. It also allowed for the mass dispersal of knowledge, giving it to the common folks and taking it out of the hands of the elites, the aristocrats, and the clergy. Prior to Gutenberg's invention, manuscripts and books were very rare, mostly because they took years to complete. They were manually copied by hand, typically by scribes who were usually monks. These wound up being very expensive, beautiful, yes, but very expensive, which left them in the hands of only the privileged few, the wealthy, or the aristocrats. The clergy, typically the upper crust, the only ones who are literate enough to understand how to read and write. So what did this mean for civilization as a whole? Well, in general, it meant that only the privileged few who had access to this knowledge controlled power. Well, certainly Gutenberg changed all that. Now, while Gutenberg's invention is certainly, by any stretch of the imagination, awesome, its real power, where it really made a difference, was in what was known as movable type. This is what allowed things to be very efficiently and with a great reduction in errors, copied over and over and over again. So Gutenberg's movable type, that technology itself, didn't change until the onset of lithography in the 20th century. Now, for my money, that led to, for its time, the greatest acceleration in scholarship and the dissemination of knowledge in human history. Now, as an interesting aside, while I was at the library, I talked to a few of the staff. And I approached them and asked them if you could name 3 books that you felt helped advance civilization or humankind, what would they be? And I'm sure you can probably guess what the first thing was out of each one of their mouths. Yeah, the Bible. So I was a little disappointed that I didn't get something out of these people. But that might have been due to their probably 20-ish to 40-ish age range. Maybe they just hadn't been exposed to or been made to read certain books in high school or college, and that's fine, because there really is no right or wrong answer. But my list was something like this. I had Isaac Newton's Principia. This is where Newton laid out, documented logically and mathematically, the proof that Earth, us, are not the center of the universe. That we, in fact, revolve around a central star, which is, of course, our sun. That was huge. Second, about Charles Darwin, Origin of the Species. A book still, for reasons that boggle my mind, is still controversial today. I understand why it's controversial, but it's that very question that I just can't process. Anyways, the third one, Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense. And this is the document which really helped restore some fervor in what was then a flagging public opinion in the Revolutionary War. And of course, we know how that turned out.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Okay, well, first I'd like to say thank you for sticking with me all this way. I'm almost done, I promise. Second, I sort of have to ask the question, because I know where this has been leading, is why go to all this length to simply show off the pallet wall I put in or the bookshelves I built upon it? It would have been so much easier to simply take a couple of pictures, post them to social media, or send them through text. You know, I could have sent them through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or wherever. But there's two problems with that. The first one being, I'm not really much of a social media user, so they're out of here. And the second, that's not really my style. What I really wanted to accomplish here was to give books the context and the respect that they deserve. If I seem a bit distracted, it's because I have two dogs here watching me as I do this, and they keep wanting my attention. Context. That's a good word. Very good word, come to think of it. I mean, we nowadays can reach for a tablet or laptop, whatever, anywhere you have Wi-Fi or an internet connection, and you can search Google or Wikipedia or what have you to get whatever information you want. And I do it all the time, I admit it. But books have been around a long time, obviously. And while our technology allows us access to a staggering amount of information, books are a much more personal medium. We can connect to books in a way you really can't connect to some digital source. So having that sort of context was important to me. More so because of what books themselves have meant, not just to us as a species, but to our civilization as a whole.
And now for something completely different. A man with 3 buttocks.
So, there you have it. Finally, after about 3 years of what I call thoughtful consideration, what others might call procrastination, I think the time spent thinking it over was well worth it. I think the results turned out pretty good. You know, they're not perfect, but for that matter, neither am I. What? Oh, I'm doing my reverse Mr. Rogers. Well, I call it that because you never see Mr. Rogers do this.
Get off my lawn, bunch of little snot-nosed little sons of.
Wouldn't ever happen, would it? So if you give me a moment, I'd like to get changed, and then I'll spend the next couple minutes wrapping this all up for you. That's much better. Before we're going to go any further, look, I don't know what the hell's going on with my hair today, so deal with it because I have to. I'd like to wrap this up, and to do so, I would like to begin where I began, and that is with Jefferson's quote, "I cannot live without books." Do I entirely agree with him? No. But understand that I and you and everybody else currently alive live in the early 21st century, not in the late 18th century. Big difference, right? But I will say that without books, I would undoubtedly be an entirely different person, and I would most certainly have a much weaker vocabulary. And perhaps most of all, I would be a more impoverished soul. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.